I like to say that martial arts is a combination of physics, anatomy, psychology, and lots of practice. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the physics portion of it. Now, the Taoist philosophy comes from the observation of nature. So it's not surprising that it still applies to most physics theories. They fit in with the Taoist philosophy quite nicely. One of the most recognized symbols of the Taoist philosophy is what's called the Tai Chi, or Grand Ultimate, basically everything. Within it is the yin and the yang. And now yin and yang are basically polar opposites: light, dark, left, right, up, down, male, female, whatever. But they're not absolutes. They're relative to each other. So something can be yin to one thing, yang to another. You got a shade of gray. Compared to white, it may be yin. Compared to black, it may be yang. So, there's elements of both. And it's a constantly changing thing. It's always moving, always changing. It's very dynamic, much like a fight. As something becomes more and more and more yang, in fact, it becomes as yang as it can get, it contains the seeds of yin. And this is because it now has to move back towards yin. And as it becomes more and more and more yin, it contains the seeds for yang. So they're constantly changing, and each one leads to the other. Now, how this applies in the martial arts is, again, you're looking at balance, looking at opposites. For example, if I push on your left shoulder, your right shoulder is going to advance. If your head moves back, your bottom half is going to move forward, or you're going to fall down, whatever. But you're going to move around the center, and there's going to be balance. As I move my hand up, I open up the bottom. As I move it down, open up the top. So as something becomes more yang, there's an opening in yin. Something becomes more yin, there's an opening in yang. The other thing is, as we advance, I've got my knife fully compressed. Okay, that's as yin as it's going to get. Where can it go? Seeds of yang. It has to start extending because it can't compress anymore, so it has to extend. So we're going to move more and more and more yang. As it becomes fully extended, that's as yang as it's going to get. Seeds of yin. So now where can it go? It has to come straight back. So limits us as to how we're going to move, but it also allows us to predict our opponent a bit. I mean, if he's fully yang, it's going to have to be yin. If he's holding his knife quite high, obviously there's an opening yin. If he's holding it low, opening in yang. If he's fully compressed, it's got to come out. We want to stay balanced, so perhaps a fully compressed position isn't necessarily what we're going to want. Maybe we want it extended slightly so we can move yin or yang, again, depending on the technique, depending on what we want to do. Now, this is also going to start to apply a little quantum theory, which is where you move from a possibility to a probability to actuality, to reality. And it's similar to an electron cloud. You've got overall limits, the physical limits of how far out we can move it or where we can move it. But there's probabilities within those limits. For example, I've got my knife up here. How am I going to attack? I'm probably going to attack from above. Probability. And of course, the possibility of the attack. I can attack from any direction, but from up here, where the probability increases that I'm going to move it downward. So we can sort of expect an attack from above. Now, the actuality is when I actually do complete the technique. Now we know this is what it's going to be, but we don't want to wait that long to respond. Can I come down and around and back up? Yes, I can, but it's less likely. So your positions affect the probability of something actually happening, and then the actuality after it occurs, then we can deal with it at that point. We also bring in the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is the active observation affects reality. If your opponent sees that you're reacting to something that he's doing, it's going to change what he's going to do. Likewise, we can draw our opponent in, holding the knife quite high. He puts his hand up to try and block or whatever, and we maybe come up from underneath or whatever. But in any given position, you're somewhat limited to where you're going to move next, and so is your opponent. And this is why you can develop a feel for an ability to respond to these techniques as they occur, and an ability to predict the technique so you can either respond or block the response or prepare for the probable responses, and you can also then set up your opponent. But this means that certain techniques will blend into certain other techniques, and it's, you're working your angles, coming across this way, naturally maybe come back this way, or turn all the way around, depending. But each technique is going to blend sort of naturally into another technique. So you, rather than having an infinite number of techniques to deal with, you've only got a set number. You also have a set number that you can, playing chess while your opponent's playing checkers, you can set up your opponent by, what's the most predictable technique? Okay, what's the most predictable, again, probabilities, response to that technique? And then how from here would I respond to that response, and so on. So you work out, and again, the further out you get, like quantum theory, the fuzzier the possibilities get, the fuzzier the probabilities get. And so the further out that you can predict or manipulate this, the better off you are. So we need to remember that we are limited by any given position, but so is our opponent, so we can predict from there. It's a dynamic situation. What you do affects what your opponent does. What he does is going to affect what you do. So it's a back and forth. And then the opposites. Whatever you work towards, the further you get out, further yang, further yin, the more you're going to have to come back in eventually. It's likewise your opponent. If you get him overextended, where's he got to go? Or where does he going to want to go? And then how can we affect that when it comes around to it? So you get your physics, anatomy, psychology, lots and lots of practice. And within the physics portion, you can apply a little bit of Taoism, a little bit of quantum theory. And if you can incorporate this into your philosophy, into your logic in the techniques that you're choosing, the techniques you're using, and then the way you blend them together, it can make it sort of more of a cohesive whole and make it easier to force the opponent to respond to what you're doing and easier for you to respond to what he's doing.